Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto Crime and Thought Crime. Today I got a white collar crime for you, and a sports related white collar crime at that. Do you love the NBA? I like it. I like basketball. I'm more of a football person, but basketball would be my second choice. And I found this one super interesting. This is the case of Timothy Donaghy, who was a well-known NBA referee who got caught up in some game fixing, possible point shaving, gambling scams not too long ago. And today we're going to delve into it and see what happened. But first, thank you so much to all my patrons and channel members. Could not do this without you. I really appreciate it. And a special shout out to everyone that watches. And if you're not subscribed, please go ahead and give that subscribe button a push, that notification bell, hit like, share. All of that helps the channel. I really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get into it. Tim Donaghy was born in Philadelphia, a suburb of Philadelphia known as Habertown, Pennsylvania, and was in a very competitive sports family, like a lot of people in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a bastion of sports affiliated types of activities, and so it's a highly competitive area. And when he came into the world January 7th, 1967, he came into a very competitive family, ones where their children were required to compete in sports and sports related activities, and their father wanted nothing but winners. Now, being born in 1967, he was well into what is known as the Gen X generation, of which I am a member. It was people born roughly 1965 to 1979 or 80, depending on what timeline you look on. But the hallmark of this generation is that we were probably the last generation that was raised without participation trophies, without getting a trophy for just participating. I remember we still had field day at school and the Arnold Schwarzenegger presidential physical fitness test, where if you were like me and were kind of unathletic and asthmatic, you got laughed at a lot. So it was that type of atmosphere. I remember crying to my mother that I never got a ribbon at field day. Her solution, run faster. I mean, that's just how we were raised. Not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong, but he grew up in that generation. So it's not surprising that his father, who was probably either a member of the silent generation, possibly an older baby boomer, pushed him to excel. In fact, he relayed in a interview with over on the Valuetainment channel with Patrick Bet David, that he once, on his way back from a basketball tournament, threw his second place trophy out of the back of his friend's car so he wouldn't have to show it to his father. So, yeah. Excellence was expected in his house. So that kind of, he grew up with that. And then he attended one of the most highly competitive Catholic high schools in the area, where a lot of professional sports referees and players come out of, and that is the famous Cardinal O'Hara High School in Springfield, Pennsylvania. So that's where he attended. He was mediocre in grades, he did admit, and I guess most of their competitiveness was around athletics rather than academics. But he did okay in grades, but certainly wasn't a honor roll or beta club kind of guy. But he did play two sports. He played baseball and basketball and did do quite well. Basketball, he confesses, was always his favorite sport. He applied to Villanova University, where his mother worked in the administrative department, and was accepted, even though it was rumored that he had possibly cheated on his SATs and had a less than stellar GPA, but yet he was admitted to Villanova University. And his father, Jerry Donaghy, was a longtime NCAA basketball referee, 40 years as a matter of fact. And as a result, he knew a lot of people in the business. Now let's talk about being connected, y'all. I know that's going to come up. Yes, he was connected. His mother worked for Villanova. He got into Villanova without, a hugely staggering great GPA and being accused of cheating on the SATs. Now, Villanova is not your average run-of-the-mill university. It is it's not Ivy League, but it's not a state school either, state school level either. It's kind of in between. So they do have more stringent athletic and academic requirements than your average college. While in college, he did play on a intramural second level basketball team. He did not play on the NCAA Division I Villanova team, but he did play on kind of what would be considered a minor league at the college type of deal. But he did aspire for a career in sports. And because his father, Jerry Donaghy, had been an NCAA basketball coach, had coached the Final Four, had refereed the Final Four many, many times. This was the level that his parents were at. He was also friends with Bill Oakes, who was a NBA referee, and his father was good friends with Jack O'Donnell, a very famous NBA referee. So when Tim graduated from Villanova in 1989, he was immediately offered a job as a high school basketball referee. So got his foot in the door. Tim was once quoted as saying in an interview that he was good friends with some other NBA referees that were around, such as Joe Crawford, Mike Callahan, Ed Malloy, of course, his family connections. And he said, yes, there was a lot of nepotism there, that Philly itself is full of nepotism when it comes to sports and sports-related careers, because so many great athletes and referees and coaches come out of there. And he actually said, I think there's a lot of successful referees to come out of the Philadelphia area because the basketball is so good. Also, there's a long history of top officials, whether you're college or NBA level. So when you start officiating, you hear about all of these guys and you set your sights to be like them, which is to be very successful in the highest levels. If you go about doing it the right way and attend a lot of camps and get seen by the right people and get pushed in the right direction, you can become successful. I think that's why a lot of people out of Philadelphia get to the NBA or get to the top college game. So, a lot of truth in what he said. I mean, he did have pretty straight family connections, but Philadelphia does have more than its average share of NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball people coming out of there at all levels. So it's just that type of area. So he spent 5 years being a referee in the Philadelphia High School Basketball League, and then was drafted as an official into the now defunct CBA, Continental Basketball Association, which was a minor league feeder system into the NBA and the ABA. Now I'm going to take a little detour here and explain all of these things to you. Let's talk about the difference between professional basketball and minor league basketball. The Continental Basketball Association, which I'll talk about in a minute, was a minor league system. And its primary purpose was kind of being a farm league to the two professional basketball associations that were alive and well in the 70s and into the early 80s, known as of course, the NBA we all know, and the ABA, the American Basketball Association, which did merge with the NBA later on, taking, I think, 6 teams with it. And if you haven't seen the movie Semi-Pro with Will Ferrell, if you haven't experienced the beauty of Jackie Moon, I highly recommend that film. It's one of my favorites.
Let's go, Chopper. Live, right here. Throw it in the blender. Okay, you got it. No, come on. Right back, though. Okay. Right back to you. Okay. Give it back again. You got it? No, right back. No, okay. Yeah. Oh, sure? Yeah. Right back. Come on now. No. Do it. Right back. Reset. Throw it to Pop. No. Right back out. Right. Right back. Right back. Here you go, Jake. Back to you. You ready? Okay. Right back, though. Shoot. Woo. Right over. Clear. Yeah. You ready? No, right back. No? Yeah. Okay, clear. All right, I'm clear. My turn.
Yeah, I'll bet my alleged son he won't make this.
And it is all about, in a very comical way, the ABA's last season, right before they merged with the NBA. So, based on a true story. So the ABA existed from 1967 to 1976 when they did merge with the NBA, even though the effects of it still hang around today. It was the ABA that created what is known as the three-point shot, and that was adopted by the NBA in 1979. So the effects of the ABA lasted well into the 80s and even till today. Now, let's talk. So that was considered a professional league along with the NBA, and then the CBA, which was originally coined as the Eastern Pennsylvania Basketball League in 1946, and it housed, a good at least 16 teams that were considered semi-pro. And its main thing was to feed college players that weren't quite ready for the NBA or the ABA in the early days into the professional system. So that they would go from they had a draft. They would draft players from colleges. They would spend a few years playing minor league basketball, and then they would feed them into either the ABA or the NBA, kind of like the farm league system with the Major League Baseball and minor league baseball. So they would kind of get called up or put back down depending on their talent. And it was in this league that Tim Donaghy started his professional refereeing career. It's estimated that players in the CBA could be paid an average of $1 million per season. So it wasn't like minor league baseball where these people are playing for $100, $150, $200 a game. This was big money. This was significant money. And as a result, most of the referees got very close to six figures for officiating. And he was actually the head official. Tim was actually the head official for the 1993 CBA All-Star Game. And it was shortly after that the CBA went defunct. And the following year, he was hired by the NBA. So 1994, he got the call and was transferred on up to the National Basketball Association. Donaghy immediately got a reputation of being honest, ironically, very honest. He has long talked about kind of an unspoken rule between NBA headquarters, certain owners, and certain players. Your high dollar, he said, your high dollar owners, like your Mark Cubans, are much more revered by the NBA home headquarters, as well as your high dollar players. And so they tend to get away with a lot more, he said. It's not intentional, but sometimes he said referees, and he could have just been saying this to, turn the heat off of him, but he did say that referees would oftentimes turn a blind eye to certain players from certain teams at certain times, just because it was kind of an unspoken rule. But he kind of started out being very honest, and he would call fouls when they occurred, no matter who did it. And so he became kind of loved and hated all at once. At first he was a good thing for the NBA because it made them look honest, but then he kind of started to bump heads with a few of the players. For example, one of the longest game suspensions in NBA history happened in 2003 when Portland Trailblazer Rasheed Wallace, who is known for his temper, Donaghy called a technical foul on him. And after the game, not only did the fans start reacting and throwing things at Donaghy, it was terrible. Even some of the other referees working that night said, you better watch your back, Tim. And sure enough, after the game, he went out into the parking lot and Wallace confronted him and spent about 15 minutes screaming obscenities and threatening bodily harm on the referee. Wallace was suspended for 7 games as a result. But all of the famous sports commentators at that time, even the Portland Trailblazers coach, admitted later on that the technical foul did occur and it was absolutely accurate. It's just Rasheed was one of those players that was used to having referees kind of look the other way, and he didn't get his way and he got upset. So that's kind of what happened there. Also, more controversy with Donaghy. He was one of the 3 referees who worked at the famous Palace of Auburn brawl between the Pacers and the Pistons in 2004 that ended started with a fight amongst players and ended with Pacer and Pistons fans brawling it out. And I actually have some video of that.
Tonight. Then Wallace is fouled, and Wallace did. Oh, Wallace right at our chest. This has potential to be serious if they don't get between. Wallace upset. Players trying to hold each other off. Steven Jackson and Rasheed Wallace trying to be peacemakers. Now Jackson yelling. Wallace still going. You need the coaches in there to get him away. Jackson challenging Derek Coleman. Somebody should just get Jackson out of quickly as possible. The problem is, if Wallace is ejected, I'm not sure. He'd have to walk past the Pacer bench to go. Now Artest has jumped over the scorer's table and is trying to get down to the bench. Artest is in the stands. Oh, this is awful. Fans are getting involved. Steven Jackson's in the fans. Rasheed Wallace going into the stands. The security trying to somehow restore order. Fans and players are going at it, and the players trying.
Now, Tim always loved to gamble, but NBA referees were forbidden from betting on NBA games. They were supposed to not bet on any type of sports because it just wouldn't be a good look. But he did. He was notorious for betting on golf games, dog races, anything he could bet on. He really loved to gamble. And as a result, had ran himself up a nice little tab with bookies that even his wife, who he married in 1995, knew nothing about. So he was trying to figure out a way to pay those off without drawing attention to them. And as a result, an old friend of his, Jimmy Batista from high school, actually gave him a call. Now, Jimmy was the exact opposite of Tim. Jimmy had always kind of walked on the wild side, had always been that kid you didn't want your son hanging around with, and had gotten himself tied up with a few mob figures and did low-level errands for certain mob-affiliated, organized crime-affiliated people in the Philadelphia area. And he reached out to Tim and just kind of asked Tim if he was in the market to make a little bit of money. Of course, Tim said he was, and he said, well, why don't you give me some solid picks for the upcoming week of NBA games, and I'll cut you in on it. How about $2,000 for every winner you pick for me? And Tim said, okay, I'll do it. $2,000 a game. I can get my debts paid off without Kelly ever knowing about it because it won't come out of my regular check. So he gave him 5 winners, and he said he did it based on his knowledge of the inner workings of how NBA corporate and thus the referees view certain players. And he said he was pretty sure that the calls would all go one way. And sure enough, he was right. Every game he gave him was a winner. Jimmy called him back up and said, was it just that easy? And he said, it's just that easy. So he paid Tim, about $8,000 for those winners that he just picked. And so paid off some gambling debts. And sure enough, Tim was able to get his gambling debts settled. But when you're used to bringing in an addition, the NBA season, even though he was making approximately $275,000 a year as an NBA official, having an additional $8,000 to $10,000 a week coming in is going to be hard for anyone to turn down. So he realized, I can still gamble with this money. Plus, it's just good to have more money. So he kept feeding winners to Batista, who then fed those winners to his mob buddies. So now you had these mobsters getting rich off of these NBA picks, and they started giving Tim $5,000 for every winner that he picked. So he's in deep, and he swears to this day he did not know that Batista had caught the mob up in what they were doing. When the take increased to $5,000 a game, Tim realized that he needed to kind of distance himself from Batista a little bit, so he brought 2 other high school buddies of his, one who shall remain nameless, and a man named Thomas Martino. and to kind of be a middleman to kind of distance Tim from Batista so that no one would ever know. And they called their little operation Smaga. Now, Smaga was the nickname they gave a mentally challenged classmate of theirs that their little clique kind of protected in high school, and everybody loved him. They called him Schmaga. So they would give each other, so he would call Martino and they would talk in code. And anytime he would say the word Schmaga, that meant this is a pick. And they actually developed their own language that he would feed to Martino. And then Martino would turn around and give that to Batista, who would feed it to whoever he was feeding it to. Meanwhile, because of all this extra money coming in, Tim had basically gotten in even deeper in gambling. After getting out of it for once, he went right back into it because he couldn't resist, and had also developed severe depression as a result and was taking antidepressants. So he was becoming less and less careful about what he was doing. And eventually, this went on throughout the 2006-2007 season. And then Donaghy started betting on the games himself, which is a huge no-no for an NBA official. And it was when a couple of bookies ran their mouth about Tim betting on games that he was called into NBA headquarters for an internal audit of what he was up to. And he was called into NBA headquarters in New York. He was questioned for about 5 hours by the top officials, asking him, did he play sports outside of work? Yes, I play golf. Do you bet on sports? He said, no, just golf. And it was just the games we play. So he lied to their faces when they knew that for sure he was betting on NBA games. And they brought the information to him. He couldn't deny it. And so he wasn't fired, but he was censored. They took away his ability to referee in the playoffs. So his 200, because you're paid by the game in the NBA. So his $275,000 salary then dropped to under $200,000 as a result of them not allowing him to referee in the playoffs and in the finals, because those games pay more, as you can imagine. So his income was almost cut in half as a result of what he was doing. And now he's really up crap creek because he's just relocated his family to Florida, and his wife doesn't know about his gambling debt, and now their base income has been cut, and he's afraid to continue with the Schmaga operation because he could lose his job, and it could even be turned in for violating the law. So he's up crap creek. So he calls Martino, and he passes along the information that he's out. He had just been paid about $30,000 in the $5,000 increments for his last rank of winnings. And so he calls Batista and Martino and says, I'm out. Can't do this anymore. Well, the mob, who has been making, if they paid Donaghy $30,000, then imagine how much they made. So they're not going to give up this gravy train easily. So Batista basically went to visit him when he had just refereed a game in Philadelphia, and basically told him that there were high-placed, unscrupulous individuals that were involved in this now. They did not want to stop what they were doing. He had two choices. He could either continue to feed them information and get paid, or he could not, and they would send somebody to visit his family in Florida. And here's what he had to say in a 60 Minutes interview about that.
Came down and picked me up.
They picked you up.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened then?
They basically told me that I needed to give them the picks, and if I didn't, that it's a possibility that somebody would go down and visit my wife and kids in Florida.
Wow. And you believed them?
Yes.
Were you scared?
Sure.
This went on for a couple more months, and then the FBI, who was involved in an investigation of a crime family in the Northeast, stumbled upon Donaghy's name tied up with Jimmy Blakely, who they knew was a errand boy for the mob. And as a result, he got himself caught up in this criminal investigation. Of course, the FBI went to the NBA and started questioning, and as a result, he was fired. Everything was kind of kept silent for a little while, but on July 27th, 2007, U.S. Representative Bobby Rush of Illinois, who was on the Trade and Consumer Protection Subcommittee, actually met with NBA Commissioner David Stern and brought up that they were going to arrest Tim Donaghy and that the NBA should be prepared with a statement. Of course, the NBA came out with information that they do not allow their referees to gamble, that he was cut loose as soon as it was found out what he was doing, and they had to do a lot of damage control, and as a result, they started really watching their officials and their coaches quite closely to make sure these things didn't happen again. Well, Donaghy did surrender to the FBI and was still trying to keep everything under cover. They didn't want this out in the broad-based media, but that didn't stop an independent contributor to the New York Post by the name of Murray Weiss to release an entire expose as a confidential informant of his within the NBA had dropped it to him, and as a result, his New York Post article released in summer of 2007 broke every bit of the scandal. It broke it so much that there were actually press in front of Donaghy's Florida home trying to get a statement from anybody in Donaghy's family. In fact, Donaghy's came out and passed them a note saying, "We are not going to talk to you. I don't know anything about this. Please leave our property." And it wasn't long after that she filed for divorce. August 15th, Donaghy appeared in Brooklyn Federal Court, and he pled guilty to conspiracy to engage in wire fraud and by transmitting wagering or gambling information through interstate commerce. He also told U.S. District Court Judge Carol Bagley-Amon about the coded language, about how he was unaware that the mob was involved, that he thought it was just between his little group of 3 friends. And he said he used all of his knowledge of the inner workings of the NBA to make his picks. He was accused by the NBA and the FBI of actually shaving points, of actually manipulating the games. But he pled not guilty to that by simply saying that he only used his internal knowledge of how the NBA officials reacted to certain players and certain teams to make his picks. He gave the picks based on how he thought the game would go for the calls. He swears to this day still he never shaved points, especially even on games that he was officiating at. He said even though points can be shaved by a referee, it's not as easy as it would seem. So he was actually fined $500,000 and will have to pay an additional $30,000 in restitution. He spent most of his trial out on a $250,000 bond, and he awaited his sentencing, which took place on January 25th, 2008. And it wasn't just the $500,000 in restitution he had to pay the government, as well as the additional $30,000. The NBA also came after him for a lot of money in a civil suit. They alleged he owed them $1.4 million because they were actually going after his salary from 2 seasons of basketball, as well as all of the reimbursable expenses such as airfare, uniform expense, travel expense, like gas to local games, everything that they would normally reimburse a referee. They were going after him for not only 2 seasons worth of salary, but all the expenses. So they claimed they owe him, plus his benefits. They were trying to get him to reimburse them for his health insurance. They were angry with him because he had exposed a weakness in the NBA system. He contends that to this day. And the judge actually ruled in the civil suit that since the crimes only took place over 1 season, that he could only be punished on 1 season. and that the fees paid to the government were more than compensation, in his opinion. So as a result, the NBA dropped their lawsuit, or their attempts to punish him by grabbing money back out of him. But on July 29, 2008, he was sentenced by Judge Amon to 15 months, as well as the $500,000 compensation to the government and $30,000 back to the Sports Commission as well. So he graciously accepted his sentence and said he had brought disgrace to his family and his sport, and graciously accepted his punishment. But to this day, he contends that he never shaved any points, and he simply was using his knowledge of his job to make the calls.
They give you a higher high than betting on other sports?
I think it gave me a higher high because I was able to predict the outcome of the games. And I think when you talk about gambling and the euphoria that comes with it, making winning picks is what excites you.
You're insisting that your betting did not influence the way you called the game. Why should we believe you?
Because the FBI did a thorough investigation, and even the NBA concluded that I did not fix games in the NBA.
You told the FBI, this is a quote, "You don't realize how easy this was for me knowing what I know."
Mm-hmm.
What exactly did you know?
I knew that there were certain relationships that existed between referees and players, referees and coaches, and referees and owners that influence the point spreads in games.
I believe him because even though the NBA contended that he had shaved points off of certain games by making what they called frivolous calls, those calls were never proven to be frivolous, even after replays. And how could he shave points off of other games that he wasn't refereeing without paying off referees? And there was no evidence that that ever happened. So I'm going to say yes, he just used his knowledge of his job to do it. I didn't say this was right, but I don't think the man ever fixed a game. I think he was scared. I think he was using it as a way to get out of problems that he created for himself. And as a result, the NBA has come down on its referees. They are basically a surveillance state. Supposedly has stopped its favorable treatment of certain teams. Who knows? I mean, I've heard rumors that when Michael Jordan, the death of his father might have been related to gambling debt, and that he might have been unofficially punished by the NBA when he left basketball for a little while and went to play minor league baseball in Birmingham. I've heard rumors that that was actually a punishment for gambling. So who knows? Who knows if any of this still goes on? I suspect it probably does, because there's corruption in almost every organization. But Tim Donaghy served out his 15 months in Pensacola, Florida, and wrote his memoir, Blowing the Whistle, The Culture Fraud of the NBA. He now basically has made his living doing speaking, interviews, his book sales, and being the consultant on 2 basketball-related documentaries. So he's still alive and well, still divorced from his wife. But, yeah, that's the result of one of the biggest gambling scams ever to come out of professional sports. There have been a couple of lawsuits that he's been involved in where he sued people for a certain book publisher for not paying him everything he was owed for his books. He did win a little over $1 million there. He was arrested in 2017 for aggravated assault, and basically he claims he was going to look for his 19-year-old daughter at a friend's house where he suspected they were doing drugs, and he got into a fracas with 2 of her friends. So that is why he was arrested. I have no further information on whatever happened there. But that's his life today, and I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, keto and crime.